Excellent. I think we will start then. So let me welcome everyone. It's nice to have so many attendees in such a short notice. We will also record this webinar, so it's possible to see it afterwards. My name is Klas Pettersen. I'm the CEO of NORA. And the background of today's seminar is that the Prime Minister of Norway and the former Minister of Research and Education announced 1 billion Norwegian kroner to AI research. That was not only research on AI technology, it's also research on the societal impact of AI and also research on AI applied for innovation in industry and the public sector. So the Research Council of Norway were given this responsibility for the AI billion, and the Research Council board have given some keywords for the ongoing work. And the keywords are concentration. They want a well-coordinated effort with a visible footprint. Interdisciplinary is a keyword. That means kind of collaboration also with the different actors and sectors. And the last keywords are network and meeting places. Also an advisory group have been giving their advice. 4 different models have been discussed in their report. And 3 of those models are relatively well known in Norway. Those are models that the Research Council typically have used before. But the 4th model, and maybe the one that has caused the most discussion, is a distributed center solution. Distributed means that researchers should primarily work at their home university or institution, but the center is proposed also to have a scientific leader group, which could consist of researchers with their main position at also their home institution. So many successful AI countries have some kind of a center solution, and I'm thrilled that in such a short notice, we were able to get directors from 3 of the most prominent centers in Europe to present in this webinar. Today, we will hear more about how their centers operate in their respective countries. So Serge Belongie here from Denmark, Simon Reeve from UK, and Samuel Kaski from Finland. And I should also say that NORA and Norway have a close collaboration with these 3 centers, and so do also individual research groups in Norway. For example, in Tromsø, Robert Jensen is very closely connected to many of these centers. And I should also mention that one thing that has brought the Nordics at least together, Serge, is the Nordic AI Meet. That's a scientific conference for young researcher that NORA initiated, but this has become now truly Nordic and was organized by you in Copenhagen and by the Pioneer Center of AI there in 2023. And in 2024, it will actually be organized by Finnish Center for AI. So we have several collaborative research projects also going on between the countries, and also with, I should also mention, the Turing Institute, of course, where we both have research project, but also we have PhD students sitting at the Turing Institute in London following their enrichment scheme there. So first out of these 3 speakers is Serge Belongie. I will not go into your scientific track record today, Serge. It's very impressive. I think more than 150,000 Google Scholar citations speaks for itself. But Serge, you have been working at University of California, San Diego, and at Cornell. I have had the pleasure of having many good conversations with you the last years, and my impression is that you were, I should say, attracted to Denmark of different reasons, maybe, but one of them was the establishment of the Danish Pioneer Center for AI. So, Serge, the screen is yours. I'm really looking forward to hear more about the Danish Pioneer Center for AI.
Great. Thank you for the kind introduction and inviting me to give this presentation. I set this up not so much as a pitch for the center. It's more like internal comparing notes kind of discussion. This is for it's provocations that a country that is considering what to do with such a substantial amount of investment is just sort of discussion points to move in that direction. So quickly, just looking at the map and the figures, the Pioneer Center for AI, DNRF grant P1, P1 is our nickname for short. It's 350 million Danish kroner. It's over a period of 10 to 13 years. It comprises funds from 5 different foundations. So it's a public-private partnership. And it includes 5 different universities, both in the capital region and in Jutland. And 2 important characteristics of the center that you'll hear me talk about throughout this presentation are that A, it's research anchored, and B, it's internationally facing. And I'll say more about those characteristics as we go. This is a snapshot of our center. We recently renovated this beautiful historic building in the Botanical Garden near Nørreport Station in Copenhagen. So this is our official headquarters as of about 6 months ago. Very central, easily accessible, appealing to international visitors. There's no successful AI research center without a healthy ecosystem. It's important to look at the sister organizations that will lead to success in this broader landscape of AI, data science, digitalization, impact of technology and society. So P1 fits into this landscape where we also have the Danish Data Science Academy, which you can think of as our domestically facing counterpart, but thematically has many points of overlap. Then there's Direct, which involves all 8 universities across Denmark and is broader than AI. It's all of digitalization. So you'll also find things like quantum computing, blockchain, and so on within Direct. And then there's algorithms, data, and democracy, where you'll find members that are politicians or journalists. So we all interact. And in fact, as of this year, we merged our annual conferences. And I see something has popped up in chat. Okay, that's just close. In this landscape, P1 is the center that is aiming for international impact. And the kind of joking way to put that is that we don't need to be world famous in Denmark, but we do need to be world famous. But in order to have success in the big picture, you need traction both at the international and domestic level. So we really work together with our sister organizations to ensure this kind of traction. One of the ways I describe Pioneer Center for AI is that it's 3 things. It's funding, it's a place, and it's a vision. And you need all 3 of those things. The funding, okay, that's the line items on the budget. Who gets what? Which university gets which amount, the PIs, and so on. A lot of our first year in setting up the center was focused on that budget. Not a fun part, not filled with inspiration, but it's essential. You get a big chunk of money, you have to make sure everyone's clear on how to use it. But that doesn't mean that you'll get any kind of thematic alignment or that it will spur collaboration. Toward that end, having a place helps. We only had a temporary space for about 2 years. A lot of moving was involved while the center was the headquarters was getting renovated, but now it's up and running, and we have a beautiful location to bring people together with permanent desks, with hot desks, with a lot of collaborative space, international visitors. As Klas said, we were able to host the Nordic AI Meet, and so having that place is a wonderful way to complement the funding and start to create an identity for AI research at a national scale. But again, if you just have funding and a place, it's still not enough because professors are very busy. And even if it's in their heart to do cross-disciplinary collaborative work, There's just these urgencies of the things they need to get done, the grant proposals that they already have. It may be unclear what the point of the center is other than money and a place to gather. That's where the vision comes in. So having a vision is essential. It's the thing where people say, I know what this center is about. I know what our North Star is. I know what our moonshots are. Which direction are we going? So all of these things are important. And they are also achievable, in my opinion, if you have support at a national scale, you have sufficient funding, you have a time scale of something like 10 to 13 years, it's all possible. One thing worth noting in this diagram is that people is not on this diagram. And that's a deliberate choice, that P1 does not employ its own researchers. It is an overlay on existing universities within the country. Not all countries approach their national research centers that way. Our philosophy there, which we'll touch on a bit later, is we would rather have more edges rather than more nodes. So just thinking of this like a graph, we want more edges, not more nodes. The research themes under the Pioneer Center for AI are broken down into these 7 so-called collaboratories. So essentially what you see in these rows are sub-areas of AI, and there are co-leads listed in the last column, and you'll notice that they are spanning across the 5 different universities. So the spirit of that arrangement is that this isn't so much about the individual universities as what we're able to achieve together. So this is a consequence of what I call the internationally facing aspect of the center. I say this in a half joking way, but when you step outside of Denmark, and this may be the case in Norway as well, people don't know the difference between DTU and DQ or AAU and AU and so on. And even though when you're in Denmark, it's eminently clear what those distinctions are, outside, it's just confusing. And so we bring a simplicity to that. One way to say it is just say DK, the .dk ending of the AI center of all these universities. It's a recognizable thing. And in the capacity as a Pioneer Center affiliated researcher, we're tapping into that simple identity, something that international students from North America, from Asia, and so on, they can just say, what's going on in AI in Denmark, not having to look into the details of the individual universities. Of course, some of the partners that I mentioned before are very involved in the details of the individual universities, but this is a theme that'll come up a few times, is just make it simple for the international scholars, for the elite AI researchers that want to do great work in your country. Let's make it as simple as possible and have a good user interface. So think of those collaboratories, those sub areas of AI, as rows of a matrix. And then we have columns that represent societal impact. So these areas, I think, will look familiar. They're related to sustainable development goals. And so now I see a question has popped up. So Klas, should I take the question now or wait till the end?
I suggest that you wait till the end, Serge.
Okay. So we have these areas of societal impact that are related to sustainable development goals. And as we pursue projects with our co-PIs and affiliated researchers, we're always looking at what boxes get checked. So our projects, I should say, P1 is focused on, it's research anchored, it's focused on fundamental research. And what that means is that the projects that we pursue enter through the rows of this matrix. We're thinking about fundamental contributions that lead to top tier publications and open source code releases and so forth. So we're primarily entering through the rows of this matrix, like learning theory, optimization, computer vision, and then finding connection in one or more of these columns of societal impact. So so this is just an example involving brain-computer interfaces, and we have a kind of a set of nudges. We call it a 7-step plan that take our PhD students and postdocs through a journey that complements the traditional academic journey and provides them certain touch points with people that are in these different sectors to maximize societal impact. This gives an idea of the organizational structure. So what I just described with the collaboratories falls within the middle here. This is our management team. The co-PI, or the co-leads that I mentioned from the different universities, they direct those different collaboratories across the universities. And the areas of societal impact are backed by our National Advisory Board. So those are distinguished members of the community that are outside of academia in sectors like healthcare, emergency response, green energy, and so forth. So they are tightly in the loop of the Pioneer Center and available for interactions with students and researchers throughout their studies. As Klas hinted at the beginning with some of the Nordic interactions, like with the Nordic AI Meet, a big part of P1 is community building. And we, for example, organize pre-conferences. So whenever there's a big international meeting happening, we organize a smaller meeting that serves the region, a kind of sphere around Denmark, Nordic countries, other neighbors, to bring together a smaller gathering and present posters and talks and so forth. We have different seminar series, and it's really designed to be a dynamic and interesting place that's attracting international visitors. We're now up to something like 240 affiliates, most of whom are Danish, but there's also Nordic collaborators in there. And a key way that we help our community is through grant proposal assistance and connecting the dots, so that whenever there are people that are looking for collaborators or they want introductions to potential funding sources, we provide that kind of support. In the interest of time, I won't go through specific projects, but I just had a couple examples of projects that are happening within the Pioneer Center. And these involve applications of modern generative AI approaches in these different areas, such as healthcare, speech recognition, natural language understanding. With regard to the vision, I talked about how moonshots are one of the ways of communicating the vision of a center. And attached to the last Nordic AI Meet, which, as Klas mentioned, with the generous support of NORA, it took place in Copenhagen. We attached a moonshot workshop where we got together all of our affiliates. There were about 150 of us that gathered for a day of co-creation to talk about moonshots that the center can pursue. And this, in that regard, it's not that P1 has a single vision, but it has a growing collection of moonshots that encapsulate the values and the ambitions of the center. So to know our vision is to know our moonshots. And these are different than big tech company moonshots, because what we bring to the table is different than a big tech company. We don't have the same compute resources. We don't have hundreds of machine learning engineers and ML ops people at our disposal, but we have very clever researchers thinking outside the box, doing creative, provocative projects. So as an example of a moonshot, we can take a sector, for example, care tech. So it's an area of growing importance involving care for senior citizens, the elderly, the infirm. So Denmark, for example, has fairly extensive infrastructure within its municipalities for home care. And this consists of fleets of cars, staff of nurses, communities that are developed with single-story buildings, not a lot of stairs, accessible design. And so this is a network that's in place. It's a system that's relatively traditional, but there's an opportunity here where if you have specialists that are in the big cities and you have the patients that are in the provinces, they would like to have access to that advanced care, but it simply may be challenging from a logistical standpoint. So that creates opportunities to combine humans and technology. And if I were to caricature Silicon Valley here, and I come from there, so I say this with affection, the Silicon Valley approach to something like this would be to get cost savings by training machine learning or robots or AI systems to replace the roles of the drivers, the cars, the care delivery, and so forth. Essentially replace it with robots, drones, generative AI software. The philosophy within P1 instead is very much about humans and machines working together. And in practice, the patients that are at these, or the citizens that are at these housing facilities, they may not have very much contact with people on a regular basis. And it's actually something they look forward to when these care nurses come to their homes. And so although ostensibly the visit may be to take blood pressure or some other kind of rudimentary measurement, there are many other intangible things that happen when a human is present. And that means that we could think about AR and VR and AI technologies that could be implemented in a way that still has the warm hands approach, a real person that comes by, but brings the capabilities of a remote physician or specialist to the table, so that a nurse that's trained with relatively rudimentary medical skills can bring a broader scope of abilities to those patients. And so this is something that puts together this kind of humans and machines philosophy, this participatory design philosophy of having all the stakeholders involved in the design. It's not trying to design out the people. And it's also something that is especially well suited to Nordic countries, but can also produce artifacts that could be of value in the global South, where there may not be sufficient medical care in the villages that require it. So let's move on here. What I'll end with is a set. We're not going to go through these. These are things that we can use for the discussion phase. It's a set of points to ponder as a region that's considering what to do with $1 billion kroner. There are a lot of points that we can consider. These are opportunities for self-reflection to ask about what the center could mean to the country and how people's views about that differ. So depending on timing, we could go through some of these, and I could just share the slides as well. But this is really meant for Klas and the rest of the leadership in Norway to just look at these questions, ask one another, what is it that we want? Where are our strengths? How can we get better? What are the complementary centers and so on that could ensure success? So I will stop there and just leave it at this slide that has some opportunities for getting involved with the Pioneer Center and learning more about us. And that's it. I'll thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Serge, for an extremely interesting talk and important for us in Norway. I think there are actually several questions here. I could, Arnoldo, I know you'll like to talk, so I will I will
Yeah.
allow you. Yeah, there you are. So you can speak yourself, Arnoldo. I saw you wrote in a question, but please
Yeah.
ask.
Thank you, Serge. This was super interesting. I would like to move there. But we tried to think on how to build something similar here in Norway, and therefore a couple of questions that are sort of motivated from reactions that we received here when we started to think to something similar here in Norway. And one thing is that one question is, you have 350 million kroner. Are you using this to fund research directly? So are you funding, for example, PhD students, or are you mainly connecting the dots and doing the edges where the dots are funded themselves? That's my
Yes.
and then I have one more question. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do use it. So the budget is divided among the universities and is controlled by the co-leads. And as you mentioned, some of it goes to PhD stipends, postdoc support, and junior faculty hiring packages. But philosophically, even though that number looks large, and I'm sure it's the same with you, like 1 billion Norwegian kroner looks big, and immediately you start chopping it up into all the stakeholders, and it becomes small. So it is seed funding. It's something that the co-leads should use to spur interesting research, particularly the kind of research that's a little weird, the kind of walk in the woods, basic, strange research, not necessarily tied to applications. It's a precious source of funding, but it's not much. So it's really meant to get things started and inspire the groups to continue applying for funding to leverage that seed funding.
Yeah. And then the other point is about priorities. So you have made priorities. You have 7 themes or 8 themes,
Yeah.
the rows on your matrix, which also means that you have down prioritized other things.
Yeah.
And was this, if you can describe that process a little bit, and what you do with these ones that you made unhappy in some sense and that start to pose P1.
Yeah. So this raises this theme of good fences make good neighbors. So, and this will, I'm sure, be different in Norway. It'll be different in every country. Denmark has very well-developed systems in place for industry funding, industry-funded PhDs, postdocs, and so forth. And what I found by talking to lots of faculty during the interview phase is that when I was interviewing for this position is what they really needed was more basic research funding. Just they wanted to attract the best students and tell them, just let the ideas flow, do interesting stuff in these different sub areas. So because of the prevalence of that type of industry funding that was already, or let's say application-driven funding that was present in Denmark, provided by the very same foundations that are funding the Pioneer Center, we made a decision not to include a certain column here. So I call it the missing column. The missing column is AI for science. So what I mean by that is when we talk about the areas of societal impact, imagine the innovations in AI coalesce on a university campus, they emerge, and they start to reach escape velocity off the campus. In AI for science, they land back on the campus, all right? So what I mean is someone in astrophysics has a very interesting problem, or say particle physics has an interesting problem that needs AI. And in that case, they may want to collaborate with AI researchers, but it's not that it would have societal impact. It's that it just helps advance science itself. Well, Denmark's very fortunate that it has that type of funding as well. So there are all kinds of AI X type funding sources within Denmark. So that column is not included. However, as an embassy for AI research, we still routinely connect those dots. So I think that's the most prevalent missing column here. Other than that, there are things like if let's say quantum computing plus AI is missing, there's a whole bunch of things. But as you get to know the Danish landscape better, and then you look back at this diagram, it turns out we've got a fantastic coverage of all of it if you look broadly at this coalition of centers. But P1 itself is really just looking at what's in this matrix, and it helps us not lose our minds when it comes to scope and implementation.
So thank you. That was the question from Arnoldo, I think. Also Sachin from NORA has a question. He was there at your Moonshot conference, and his question is it was nice to attend Moonshot's workshop this year, Serge. Do you think such a meeting is regular feature for such a center? What are your reflections on the utility of this meeting for a common vision?
Yes, so I'll describe this as if we're all talking among insiders, because there's a glamorous aspect of moonshots, and then there's a really tough, less glamorous part. And I think it would be delightful if within Norway you did the same thing and we could compare notes. The glamorous part was when we got together in the room, the ideas flowed and it was inspiring and amazing. Everybody had their flip charts and post-it notes and idea sketches and so forth. And something like 4 dozen ideas emerged. But in the aftermath, we had piles of notes and things and thought, okay, well, now we're going to reach out to the co-leads and ask them to distill it into little one-pagers. And boy, did that not happen. I mean, it's not for lack of interest, but like I mentioned before, the PIs are busy. I mean, they just got to teach and write their grant proposals, and there's just so much stuff going on. So moonshot style thinking is just not part of the regular diet of faculty. They just don't naturally have the space for it. So the emails just kind of went unanswered. And next thing you know, the CSO, COO, innovation manager, and I were just sitting at our own laptops with all the post-it notes and say, okay, let's just make them ourselves, just make a handful, picked a few of the moonshots and just rolled up our sleeves and made them, and then sent them to the co-lead saying, okay, here are some examples. Now can you help? Yeah, that helped because now they saw exactly what we needed to do. But then, with a 4 or 6 month cadence, we have to bring people back and iterate through the ideas and look at how the landscape has changed with big tech and with generative AI systems and controversies and EU AI Act. All those things are impacting the moonshot. So it's a conversation. And, we started them as something that came out of collaboratories and then interacted with areas of societal impact. The next time we convene, it's going to go in the other direction. And, there's no reason that they have to sit within a silo of a collaboratory. Most of the moonshots end up using like 3 of them. So those are just a few thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. I have many questions, but I will have to save them, Serge, for later, because I think it's time now to move on to the next speaker. So thank you so much, Serge, for an excellent presentation and also interesting reflections afterwards. I'm sure we will keep in touch. So if anyone has questions, you can write them to me, and I could also probably provide and pass them on to Serge. So thank you. The next speaker now is from the Alan Turing Institute. It's Simon Reeve. He's the Director for Innovation. As mentioned in my introduction, innovation is also actually a key in the Norwegian AI investment. So I look forward not only to hear you talk about how the Alan Turing Institute is organized, but hopefully also if you could mention something about the innovation aspect, which is your background. So please, Simon, the screen is yours.
Thanks very much, Klas, and thanks for the invitation to speak today, and good to meet everybody. So a little bit about my background to start with. I started my career as a mechanical engineer in the energy sector, and I worked in the power sector, part of energy, for much of the first 20 years, building power plants around the world. That included nuclear, fossil, and then later on renewables and building renewable teams. I also worked in product R&D in the power sector. And that included some power plants in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, so I know the region well. I then sort of moved into more of the sort of safety and assurance side with Lloyd's Register, and that covered other parts of the energy sector, including oil and gas as well as renewables, and then back into technology, and then through a succession of secondments, first into the foundation side, which is a charity that funds research in safety at Lloyd's Register. I then got to know the Alan Turing Institute, and I've been there now for 18 months, helping them on their strategic pivot, which I'll explain a little bit about now. So I'll just share my slides. We confirm you can see those.
Yes, excellent.
So the Alan Turing Institute was set up in 2015, initially to be the National Institute for Data Science, and then AI was added in 2017. And it was a recognized need by the government to have a centre to build skills as well as the research portfolio in the fastly accelerating data science and AI sort of landscape. As with many first centres, the sort of activities that we got involved in were wide and varied, covering all sorts of different sectors. And then in 2021, the government launched a couple of new policy documents and strategies. One was the National AI Strategy, and the other was the National Innovation Strategy. And both of these were targeting on how the UK could get more bang for its research buck, if you like. So how can it convert the value of that research into societal and economic benefit? UK has always had a strong reputation for research, but not always so strong in converting that into business. And so the Turing has been on the strategic pivot to sort of grow the innovation and impact side to complement the existing skills and research side over the last sort of year or two since we launched the new strategy. So to say a little bit more about that strategy, let's get my slide to move forward, there's a slight delay. So we called it Turing 2.0, the new strategy launched in March 2023. And this is all about, as it says, changing the world for the better, providing an end-to-end interdisciplinary pathway and enabling impact at scale. So one of the strengths that the Turing brings is we have a great interdisciplinary network, and we can easily convene both academic and business partners across those disciplines to suit a particular challenge. The other difference that we introduced with the new strategy was, rather than being spread very widely across lots of different sectors, was actually to focus down on national strategic priorities. And those are health, defence and security, and environment and sustainability. I'll come back to those in a little bit more detail. So over the last year, we've been in this transition, and we're still partly in this transition to focus down, the activity. So we set out 3 goals going forward. First and foremost, it's advancing the world-class research that we have and to enable us to apply it to national and global challenges. Secondly, it's about building skills for the future across the UK and internationally. And then thirdly, and really importantly, it's also about driving an informed public conversation. And I'll touch on each of those in the next sort of 15 minutes or so. So first, our place in the ecosystem. So we worked closely with UK government and as well as with the sort of business industry and civil society, both in policy work and with other sort of advocacy work, which we'll come back to. We provide national leadership, as I explained, focused on the national priorities. And then we broker and convene cross-sector and interdisciplinary research. And through that base, we have become a strong key asset to the UK internationally. We now have a very strong university network right across all UK universities. We started off with 5 founding universities who were in effect joint venture partners to the Alan Turing Institute. We expanded that network to 8 after a few years, then 13. And then during 2023, we launched a new sliding scale of engagement for all academic institutions to be able to engage with us at different levels. In terms of how that works, what we ask is that, a little bit like Serge was saying before, we ask that the academics keep one foot in their home university as well as having a contract with the Turing. So that may vary from between sort of 50% to 80% of their time with the Turing, but it means we end up with a nice distributed network of research excellence spread around the country that we can call on for different projects and programs. And so the academic community can join us from 6 months to 6 years, depending on the nature of the program and the activity and the degree to which they get involved. Through that UK network, we also have a reasonable international network. Majority of our focus is in UK based, but these are partners that many of you will recognise around the world and also be engaged with, who work with us on specific programs. And then equally important are our business, both private and public sector organisations, of which this slide just represents a selection. The dark grey band at the top, they're what we call our strategic partners. So they sign up with a significant sum of money, usually in the millions, to run a specific programme over a 5 to 10 year period. So they will fund both the research and the application side and help get that into market. So to give a couple of examples, you've got NATS there, which is the UK National Air Traffic Control Service. So we're working closely with them to look at applying AI to the air traffic control system that we have across the UK and how that links up internationally. So that's done to a digital model that runs alongside the current model, and we can therefore test new calculation methods, forward plan new scenarios and see how that's going to work in reality. We also do quite a bit of work with the defence organisations you can see listed there, and I'll come back to some examples on some of those in a minute. So the challenges this community will certainly recognise is that data science and AI is evolving very fast and in unpredictable ways. So we need to help society keep up. We need to help translate the latest tools and techniques into something that's going to provide positive societal benefit. And that's why our new focus is all about science and innovation, and in particular focus down on these 3 national strategic priority sectors. So in health, the big challenge is to transform healthcare to enable better outcomes for all. In environment and sustainability, it's addressing the climate and the biodiversity crisis in order that we can have a more sustainable ecosystem. And in defence and security, it's about protecting the UK in conjunction with its partners internationally, as well as our people and the places that we inhabit. So to give a few examples of what that looks like in practice. So in health, a lot of focus in recent years has been joining up the data sets across the different health organisations in the UK. Many are increasingly available perhaps to a local trust, whereas before they were only available to a local hospital. A trust in the UK is a collection of hospitals in a particular region, and then expand that to a region, and then ultimately expand that data availability to the nation as a whole. Which means whether that's researchers working on something like a digital model of a heart, which is the diagram on the left, or it's a clinician at the front end of carrying out an operation, they've got access to a far more valuable data set to help them make appropriate clinical decisions. You also get many specific applications, such as the photograph on the right, which is a human exoskeleton assisting someone to recover after a serious car accident, I think it was in this year. And in this case, this was a project we did with the University of Edinburgh a few years ago. And using the appropriate sensors, the AI model, and assessing how the body is healing over time, the research community were able to demonstrate a reduction in the time to recover from serious accident by up to 50%. A couple of examples in the climate and sustainability space. So we have a long-standing partnership with the British Antarctic Survey, and with them we've been looking at the models that are used to predict the movements of sea ice, and in particular around the North Pole. As we know, the sea ice's rate of melting is accelerating, and that has a knock-on effect on wildlife, on the local communities, as well as on the the systems in the ocean, etc. So if we can increase the accuracy by which we can predict how that sea ice is going to perform from year to year, we can therefore improve the mitigation strategies that we use to adapt the situation and react to the situation. So working with the British Antarctic Survey, using all the existing data and then using live data year on year, we've been able to increase the accuracy of prediction for up to 6 months in advance by up to sort of 6 or 7%, which compared to the previous sort of European models. So again, using AI to improve the accuracy of sea ice melting detection. And then a more sort of practical in a city example, this is an underground farm in southwest London growing salad crops. And our scientists have been working with this organization to help improve the yield of these salad crops by up to 50% by smart analysis of the energy consumption, the light that they require, the nutrients in the water, etc. And the big advantage of this is twofold. One, that it uses redundant old sort of inner city infrastructure. And two, because it's located in the city, not out in the countryside, the distance from the farm to its end user, either in the local shops or in the local hotel chains, is far reduced. So you're greatly reducing the transport footprint, particularly obviously in the winter when you haven't got to fly salad crops around the world, or even from sort of large out-of-city greenhouses. And then in defence and security, we work closely with the UK defence organisations, as I said, and a large part of that is in looking at the cybersecurity threat, using a whole host of techniques and game sort of methodologies that many will be familiar with to ensure that we have robust controls against the risk of cyber attack on national critical infrastructure. And the similar activities obviously affecting things like critical supply chains and deliveries, such as the cargo ships issue, which is in the news at the moment. So that was a snapshot around those sort of three strategic priorities, if you like. And so supporting that, we have a core in-house team that focuses on things like the whole open source infrastructure. We have something called the Turing Way that some of you will be familiar with on our website, so you can access the latest methods and techniques through that. We have research application managers and community managers that specialize in particular sectors. They've worked both in academia and in business, and so they understand the translation area. We have a research engineering group that links up to some of the projects that I've spoken about. And then we're building a really strong foundational capability that is able to support the foundation models that increasingly underpin the AI systems that are growing nationally and internationally. We then have a couple of other horizontal programs that link into those strategic challenges. We have a data-centric engineering team. This was funded by one of our founding partners, Lloyd Register Foundation, to introduce data-centric thinking into engineering. Now, you could say in some senses, data has always been part of engineering, but we haven't always called that. And the pyramids were built using a certain type of data. But the modern sort of data science, up until recently, hadn't been fully embedded into engineering education. So this is what this program has enabled it to do. And in particular, we're focused now going forward on these sort of four sectors. We also have a horizontal team in digital twins. The Turing has built up a big networking capability in digital twin technology over recent years. And they work with internally and externally with the particular themes that I spoke about, especially health, the natural environment, and infrastructure. So that's sort of the science and the innovation side of it. We then have the building the skills for the future. So initially, we started out building the tertiary education skills, the PhDs and the postdocs. And we're now in the process of transferring that knowledge further into industry, government, and the third sector. So how can more people understand and adopt the skills that we have? And we do that through the usual sort of means that have already been mentioned: placements, knowledge exchange, capacity building initiatives. I'll give some examples of those. So data study groups are what we call our hackathons. So a business will set a particular challenge. A team will come together for 5 days and they'll work almost around the clock to address that challenge and come up with some solutions, put them back to the business. The business decides which one it wants to adopt. And what we started to do is actually then provide an internship for 1 or 2 from that team to work with the business for the next 6 months to ensure they embed it into the business. We then run other enrichment schemes and internship activities. And then one of the latest programs launched 9 months ago now was what we call Bridge AI. So this was a UK government, Innovate UK sponsored initiative between ourselves, the Digital Catapult, and another research centre, the Hartree Centre. And this is about getting AI skills into low adoption sectors. And in particular, those were selected as being agriculture, transport, construction, and the creative industries. So businesses that often don't know what other questions to ask, how do they start on the journey of adopting AI either into their business systems or into their own products and services? So Bridge AI gives them a focal point to go to. Depending on the nature of their requirement, we can either then signpost them to ourselves, to Digital Catapult, or to one of the other partners in this initiative to help them on that journey of AI adoption. Another new initiative launched just over a year ago now was the AI Standards Hub. This was in conjunction with the British Standards Institute and the National Physical Laboratory. So this is a community for access to the latest best practice and standards. And again, a number of you in this call may already be aware of that. So I won't go into further details. Then the third pillar that's equally important is how we drive an informed public conversation. As we're all aware, over the last 18 months, the public have become more aware of the latest evolution of AI. Yes, we had some evolutions of AI in the past with things like sort of Siris and chatbots helping your phones, but the public perception can be misleading and doesn't always keep up with where the science is. So that ranges from everything to advising the BBC and the television channels about the types of images that are appropriate to use. For example, AI doesn't always equal robot. And then also advising on the different types of AI and when it's important to be concerned about sort of major longer-term risks and when it's important to think about short-term risks affecting democracy, freedom of information and misinformation, etc. So we have a strong role to provide balance. So we make the information available publicly, we develop the frameworks and tools, we work through our policy team with the government regulators, and then help signpost the way to the correct information. A couple of examples of that. Some of you would be aware the UK issued its white paper on AI regulation last year, which is focusing on sort of vertical sector-based regulation initially. But we in the Alan Turing Institute have advised the government that ultimately they also need to develop a more horizontal approach to AI regulation, which matches the sort of European approach. You need both. You need the sector to say vertically what works in their sector, and then you need the horizontal that works across. And as you'll also be aware from the London AI Summit in the autumn, that safety became a really sort of key part of this. So 2 pieces of legislation expected further from the UK government in the next sort of 6 months are, one is the latest update on digital identity, and another one is related to self-driving cars. And then, a big part of how this all connects together is what really affects all of us across society. We're all more and more familiar with the way that AI sort of represents and watches what we do and monitors what we do and helps sort of manage things on our streets, as per this image on the right. And then increasingly how those different networks join up, not just in our towns and villages, but also across the countryside, regionally and nationally as a whole. And we're linked into a number of sort of national frameworks through this sort of new cyber physical infrastructure. Informing the public and everybody else obviously important. Hopefully some of you are aware and maybe coming to our AI UK conference in March. And then we provide Turing lectures available on YouTube and various other sort of channels to keep people informed at different levels. So ultimately, it's all about how do we support a fully digital society to help address the systemic productivity issues and ensure more inclusivity, fairness, and robustness in everything that's there. It's an exciting journey. There's a huge amount to do. There's a huge amount already taking place. It was really interesting to see some of the parallels with what Serge was talking about. But hopefully that's given you a bit more of a flavour from the Alan Turing Institute, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. We have at least one question. And I should also note, you mentioned at the end there AI UK. Sachin, maybe you could post a link, because we do actually support some Norwegian PhD students and students to go to AI UK. So if anyone are eager to go there, please post a link about that, Sachin.
Yeah, I'll do that.
The question from Sachin: how could AI centers cooperate with each other? Could there be long-term initiatives like data sets on topics of mutual interest combined with some competitions, for example?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really important. We are already linked into a number of the AI centers around Europe and further internationally, including NORA. And it's important that we think about what is the priority that is going to benefit us all mutually, now this year, and where do we want to spend our time and effort? There's lots of things we could do. It's about, what is going to be most beneficial in the near term. And I certainly think forums like this, making people aware of what's what, signposting, access to specific events or teams or knowledge that perhaps not everyone's aware of, is an important part of that.
Excellent, and again, thank you so much for an excellent talk. I'm not sure if you are still here after Sami's talk, so if so, maybe we could save also some questions to the end. But let's go on in the program. Samuel Kaski is the director of the Finnish Center for AI. He is also, I think, an Alan Turing Institute fellow. Maybe you could also mention how such a fellowship is working, Sami. I should also say that you saw now that UK was early out with strategies and centers and such, and I must say that Finland was also extremely early with their AI strategy, and also early out with establishing the Finnish Center for AI. So Sami, I'm looking forward to hearing more about the Finnish Center for AI. The screen is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Klas. So very glad to share what Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence is, and for two reasons, of course. One is that if it helps you somehow in designing yours, and second, that we are very collaborative, and it would be great to have a partner organization also in Norway. So what is the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence? It's essentially, it is what the Research Council of Finland calls a flagship of research. And the Research Council of Finland is the modern name for the Academy of Finland, which some people may have heard earlier. So what this kind of a flagship is, it needs to be two things. So it's basically, it's a competition, and the participants of the competition need to have a strong claim of two things. One is that they need to have excellent research. Everything needs to be based on excellent research, but then they need to take impact seriously. And the impact, societal impact, they can define in various ways. In our case, it is very much based on economic impact through companies, but also directly by working with governmental organizations. And impact in other fields through transforming them with artificial intelligence. I mentioned that this is based on a competition. So organizationally, Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence is basically a big grant, joint grant with a few organizations, which has both really beneficial properties and then slightly negative properties. So the beneficial ones obviously are that the competition guarantees the high level, and because it's just a grant, it is not competing with the mother organizations at all. All the employees are actually employees of a university or research organization. And so it means that everything we do is synergistic if we do sensible things. The slightly negative side is that in a competition, there is, of course, all kinds of kind of local optimization ongoing. In this case, the applicants are universities. Of course, there needs to be a PI in that university who runs it, but the universities are formally the applicants, which implies that the universities are then playing games against each other. And as a result, for instance, we don't have all Finnish universities who have strong machine learning research involved formally in Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence. And we then started building those kinds of links after we kickstarted this center with 3 organizations in the beginning. So the volume, it's sizable, especially compared to the size of the country, 70 professors. Some figures you can see on the right. Maybe I'm highlighting one of them, which is that in a large proportion of the activity, there are companies involved. And indeed, we have a wide ecosystem of partner companies, 440 altogether, including companies and public sector partners, such as hospitals. And the companies include the international big companies, startups in Finland, and Finnish companies in other domains. Really important partners you see on the left here, the other flagships from this same competition in other fields, including climate sciences, 6G, which would be communications, cancer research, and so on, where we have a very strong synergy. They need artificial intelligence to be in the bleeding edge of their own domains. And we, of course, developing those, appreciate the case studies that we get from them. Everything we do is international. We are just listing a few of the big partner organizations in the left here, including the Turing Institute you mentioned. Yes, indeed, I also have a position in UK, which is meant to build strategic collaboration. But I'll be glad to talk more about that. But now I thought to focus directly on the Finnish Center. Maybe 2 highlights here. One is the NVIDIA AI Tech Center, which is together with us, NVIDIA, and the National Supercomputing Center, and then ELLIS, which I'm going to say something more. I checked that Serge didn't say very much about ELLIS, so we are not overlapping. We both are very active there, so I'll say something about that. Okay, how FCAI operates. It runs a set of AI research programs which develops the AI technologies, which you can see on the left here, in topical fields where we have strong expertise. These research programs work together as FCAI teams, as we call it, sets of postdocs supervised by or mentored by professors of the teams in which they are, who come together for a specific mission where they bring together these technologies for a joint goal, which gears towards these, which you see in the center, which are the main missions of the FCAI, building AI technologies which are data efficient, understandable, so that they people can use them well, and which need to also be trustworthy, and of course they need to be applied ethically. These technologies that we build, we apply in what we call highlight programs, one in each field for a few highlights, demonstrating what is doable, for instance, in materials research and so on. Additionally, we have special interest groups, which are completely bottom-up things that people can set up for purposes that are useful for their research. And the company collaboration is really ingrained in all of this. So the topics that I list here are the ones where we have strengths, and then companies come to work with us on these topics with their problems or wanting to know what we are doing and so on. Any organization, of course, sooner or later needs to answer to the question that what is the unique selling point of your organization? Why do you exist? In FCAI, maybe the nutshell view is this slide. Of course, there's other strengths as well. This is a sizable operation. Regarding research, the strengths in the core machine learning, especially in probabilistic machine learning, and in particular in combining that with user modeling, human-computer interaction driven by modeling, which we know how to do. And now, if you look at all the really nice centers around the world, there are lots of centers that focus on machine learning. There are lots of centers that are really excellent in human-computer interaction. There are much fewer ones where these two would really come together so that the synergy is more than just applying human-computer interaction techniques to machine learning or vice versa. In the center, I'm mentioning the way how we work with other fields, the other flagships of other fields, for instance, which we formulate as virtual laboratories. And here I don't mean virtual reality, I mean simulation-based computations in experimental designs and so on. I'll get back to this later. And in the international collaboration, which is absolutely crucial, of course, particularly useful opportunity is the ELLIS network that I will also get back to in a minute. About the virtual laboratories, so the thinking here goes so that at the moment, each of the other fields which requires new methods in doing their computational product development or experimental design, whatever they are doing computationally, each field is doing things computationally at the moment. The state of the art is that all fields, engineering, biology, drug design, and so on, have their own toolboxes for their field, which is a lost opportunity because many of the technologies, especially the AI methods, are of course meant to be cross-usable across different fields. So this brings us a scale advantage if we can interface in an efficient way from the same methods to multiple of these fields. And now if that interface exists, then we can also bring to play the different collaborative AI-based technologies that are in the core of what we develop. That's roughly what we mean by virtual laboratories. So now, for instance, pharma companies who are working with us, they essentially have already set up a virtual laboratory with us where we bring some of the tools, they bring some of the tools, and many of the tools that we develop, we are also applying in engineering, biology, materials design, and so on. Some examples of what I mean with these, when I talk about the humans and AI working nicely together, here are a few examples on the left and right here. In the center, an example of what we would mean by trustworthiness. For instance, privacy preservation of data is one important aspect of that. We work with the other fields here, 3 examples: engineering enzymes, optimizing chemical plants, drug design, all of these with companies, hospitals, and the National Technical Research Center. How we work with companies through joint recruitments. For instance, we have a half professor in Aalto who is also half staff scientist in NVIDIA. We have joint projects such as with Elisa in an example in the center, and then startup spin-offs there is a really active, vibrant startup ecosystem close to Otaniemi, which is the Aalto University campus. So that was a really nutshell view on FCAI, and I promised to say one more thing. So what is the organizational structure? So I mentioned that it's basically one big grant which has a steering group, and it has a board which is set up by the universities, and that's how the universities, the mother organizations, have the decent control to us. But the power balance, I think, is pretty well set, because the grant is, of course, for a certain purpose. So the university cannot decide to use the funding for something completely different, but it has an incentive of leveraging on what we can do with FCAI. So that way, both are useful to each other. So it's a big project which has decent independence and has an incentive to be useful to the mother organizations and vice versa. Then I promised to say something about ELLIS. So one problem we cannot solve alone, no matter how good we are in a small country, which is of the size of a reasonably small city on the global scale. Finland, 5 million people, Norway, similar situation. One problem that we can't solve is that we cannot possibly gain that much visibility that the bigger organization, bigger country can, or as big leverage. This is where partnerships come to play. And now ELLIS, European Laboratory for Learning and Intelligent Systems, has as its mission or vision that all decent activity, of course, should play on its strengths, and some of those strengths are place-based. So it makes sense that, for instance, there are AI researchers in Helsinki who are building on the strengths of what is the unique opportunity there. On the other hand, in Stuttgart, there is a completely different kind of opportunity. So this activity needs to be localized. It needs to be excellent, otherwise it's not useful to anybody. And the insight now is that we can build on a global scale critical mass by networking them sensibly together, so that operation across these sites is fluent when it is sensible. And now then we have critical mass, and by advertising that critical mass widely, we can build attractiveness, which would otherwise be for a small country really difficult to get, no matter how good you are. So that combination seems to work very nicely. And we have been very active at FCAI from the beginning of ELLIS, and have hosted one of the first nodes, and have been building critical mass also within Finland with this node. And if I bring one example here, you can see some of the partners. If I bring one example, which I think is particularly useful, is the joint doctoral program, joint call for PhD students that ELLIS runs once per year. It is soon becoming one of the really most attractive PhD programs in the world, which would be an instance on what we can gain together and still be place-based on the things that matter, where the place-based actually matters. And that's it. I thought to be brief and rather answer questions if you have some, and here are some links for more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samuel. There is at least one long question here, and so Serge and Simon, you're still here, so please, you can also open your camera if anyone wants to ask you questions. I will start with a short one, and I'll want some links to the humanities sciences. Could anyone of you, could you please comment on this? Because in Norway, we have been instructed that the AI billion should not go only, of course, to AI technology. It should also go towards societal impact, research on that, and also research on innovation and industry and how to deploy AI. How is the links to the humanities sciences in your centers and your countries? Maybe we should, Sami, start with you, but also the others could maybe add on.
Yes, certainly. It's the humanities side of it is really important. In our first iteration, we ran a very successful arts and humanities program for a number of years, and a number of learnings across the humanities and social sciences sectors were then sort of applied into some of the other streams. If you're watching closely when I talked about our data-centric engineering team, that has a humanities group. And so we think there's a huge amount of beneficial sort of additional understanding if you bring the humanities together with the more sort of STEM subjects, as we call them in the UK, science, technology, engineering, and maths, into solving societal problems. The other area that's really important is on the policy side, so that we have a lot of social scientists working in obviously in our policy team, who also link back with some of the other technical disciplines in order to ensure we're sort of with this informed, holistic approach to the proposed solutions.
Yes, Sami or Serge, do you have anything to add here? The humanities, how are you connected to the humanities? And then maybe also like especially fields like law, right? Is very important, and in EU, I mean, with the AI Act coming up, extremely important also to be oriented toward those fields. Sami, you have the hand, so I will. Yeah.
Right. In two senses. So one is that we have a program, AI in Society, which is actually run by social scientists and lawyers. And the starting point was that we would have very much wanted to also include humanities more broadly in there, but it is when they need to be able to work with people who are developing the technologies, and not all fields are that far yet in AI applications. So we don't have, in all of the fields, we don't have people who would be willing and interested in interfacing. But then the other one is that the many fields of humanities are actually a really important application domain for AI technologies, and they want to use the technology. So for instance, University of Helsinki, one of the host organizations, is running a center for digital humanities. And of course, that's a collaboration partner. And this we would be willing to do more. It depends on the capability of the other field as well, both sides.
Yeah, Serge.
So Pioneer Center for AI in Denmark itself is primarily focused, it's aligned with the Ellis initiatives that Sami described. So in that respect, the day-to-day things we do are oriented toward NeurIPS papers, CVPR, things like that. But in terms of the forming the edges, connecting the dots, and so forth, also on a daily basis, we're connecting researchers in social data science, law, philosophy, other areas in humanities. The real function of the Pioneer Center in that respect is making introductions. So Denmark actually is blessed with plenty of funding for researchers in the humanities to do AI-related projects in principle, but in practice, they have found it hard to find the AI collaborators. And so the existence over the last couple of years now of the Pioneer Center has helped actually create those teams. And part of it is because the students are required to have complementary work throughout their PhDs and postdocs. So in short, P1 itself isn't funding the humanities-related work, but we're cultivating an environment to create those collaborations.
Excellent. We have a couple of questions that are quite linked. I think it's also the relationship to the applied side of the field, and also to the big tech companies, from Google to OpenAI. I know, Serge, that you have had a position in Google, so you could maybe answer this. But it seems to me that your centers are a little bit different in that maybe the Pioneer Center in Denmark is more fundamental, more towards basic science than at least Alan Turing Institute and Finnish Center for AI. But how do the three of you kind of provide the theoretical underpinnings and methodologies that would then enable applied research to solve specific problems? Do they have specific funding? Because that's maybe from the, if you spend kind of governmental money on this, you should maybe fund the parts that are not kind of self-financed, typically through industry. So that's the two questions that I tried to put into one question now. And I also, for myself, I should also ask, I mean, how do you also relate to, for example, in Norway, the research institutes are very important when it comes to the applied side. So how do you relate to research institutes or industry research in general in your countries? Serge, that was a long question with many questions, but
so yeah, there's a part of it that has to do with fundamental research, and part is the engagement with big tech. So one thing I mentioned in my presentation is that a lot of the Danish faculty were very eager to get access to funding that was for fundamental research. This is blue sky, walk in the woods, semi-crackpot kind of weird research funding. That is what they wanted. They aren't short on applied research funding. Denmark is very strong in that area. What they wanted was something where their grant proposals have been rejected. They can't get a weird project funded. That's where P1 comes in. And that's what puts a smile on the face of the researchers. And when the prospective students are shopping around with the help of the LS PhD program that Sammy described, they're not fully developed researchers, but they know they want to do something foundational. And it turns out in that program, if they're looking at a potential school and the professors start talking about applications right away, the students get turned off because they want to do stuff that's fundamental, not something that's that is starting with the applications. But with that matrix structure that I showed, we have a kind of Jedi mind trick in place that maybe brings them in through those fundamental areas and then steers them toward these areas of application. But again, this isn't done in a vacuum. This is because Denmark has such a strong system in place already for industry and applied research. On the big tech side, there's nothing so special about Denmark's view of US big tech relative to Europe's. I think, as I mentioned, P1 is internationally facing, and as such, we engage with big tech companies as is pragmatic. And many of our graduates want to get jobs at the big tech companies. So there's a sense in which the hotshot AI researchers that get their degree, they want to have big impact. They're excited about DeepMind, OpenAI, and so on. They want to do internships. They want to apply for jobs there. That's going to happen. But when we look at the Danish landscape with our partners like Danish Data Science Academy, Algorithms, Data, and Democracy, that's where you find discussions about AI sovereignty within Europe and working, for example, with a French startup like Mistral or with a German startup like DeepL for translation. Those kinds of dialogues are happening at the same time. And I think as a director of an internationally facing research institute, we really want to keep the dialogue, a healthy dialogue with big tech, but also balance that with the European sovereignty.
I guess it may also be a competitive kind of advantage that we have in academia, that you can actually follow these kind of moonshots or things that typically is not kind of the research topics of the big companies. So we have a question here. Are you any of your centers advising your governments? So if any of you could answer that, or are there other institutions in your countries that are advising, Simon?
Yeah, certainly. And I was just going to add a comment on your last question as well about working with big tech and the importance of foundational research. Absolutely. You know, we need to maintain cutting edge foundational research in order to be ready to stay abreast with the future applications. So we support both. There'll actually very shortly be a new foundational AI and data science director announced at the Turing. In terms of big tech relationships, yes, again, absolutely. Google DeepMind are neighbours to us in the King's Cross area of London. We work very closely with them. You'll find a number of references to projects and activities and events that we do with Google DeepMind. Some of our people decide to go on to do Google DeepMind. Some of Google DeepMind's people decide to come to us. And similarly with the other big tech companies, that's really important. Policy, I touched on this and the relationship with governments. Yes, absolutely. And you know, the big thing in the UK, obviously, last year was the London AI Safety Summit. When the government first started talking about that, they were purely talking about existential risk. And so us and our policy team, working with other partners like the Rosalind Franklin Institute and other government advisors, we helped to steer the narrative into something that was much more inclusive and included a more balanced approach to the real sort of safety and risk issues on AI, including things like near-term misinformation, disinformation, threats to democracy, etc., which we're increasingly likely to see over the next sort of 12 months with elections, not just in the UK and US, but other countries as well. So yeah, we work closely with all the government departments, advising them on what's appropriate in terms of narrative and legislation.
Thank you. Sami, also have your hand. I will also, because we are soon ending, I will also ask a last question myself. First of all, in Norway, the Research Council have not decided whether we should have some kind of a distributed center solution in Norway or not. So this is an ongoing discussion. And this is exactly why we invited you to get kind of the aspects from your countries and how you have organized this. So also, Sam, you can answer the question you probably wanted to answer, but please also could you touch upon, because although you have all distributed centers, you have some kind of location as well. And how has this kind of how has this model served this the centers, the universities that are not kind of close to your heart, so to say? Do you have any kind of internal friction because of that, or how is that solved? So Sami, that was probably not why you had your hand up, but please also touch upon the last question, and then we will end after that.
Sure, we'll be glad to. Yeah, regarding the applications where the fundamentals, so yeah, absolutely, our center is focusing on the fundamentals of AI, plus taking the impact seriously. So I actually don't like thinking about applications and fundamentals separately, because the applications are a tool of doing the fundamentals better and vice versa if we do that well. And in AI, it often is so. Of course, individual people may focus. Then regarding the advising the government, this is a difficult question, because typically there are very few people who have to do all of it, right? So if you want to have that leverage, then you have to increase the number of people who are actually good at both. So I was in the Technology and Innovation Council of the Prime Minister last term, and that's laborious. So it's absolutely important for the country, but then I needed to have some cycles for that. So then regarding this distributed nature, I think Norway now has the similar situation as Finland has, that it's the same money pot that you have to argue on. So it's very difficult to say that one place is so much better than others that it needs to have all of the money. But then on the other hand, building the synergy in a completely distributed thing is slightly more difficult than a centralized. So what we are aiming at is a combination, so that there is some hub where it's easy to organize common workshops and so on, for instance, but then many of the things can be completely distributed, and then the people need to sit where it's good for them to sit, also within a university, not everybody in the same place.
Thank you so much. We will let that be the last word here. So again, thank you to all speakers, presenters. This is an ongoing discussion in Norway, and your input was very valuable. So by that, we will end the webinar. But if any of you have time to sit there and discuss a little bit after that, we will end the recording. But there is room